Bonjour à tous et bienvenue pour cette masterclass Fettercairn. Alors aujourd'hui, on va pouvoir explorer un petit peu le terroir écossais. Alors on entend souvent ce terme de terroir, mais là on va pouvoir le voir aussi à travers des éditions, alors que vous ne voyez pas sur scène, mais qu'on va vous faire goûter en avant-première. Ils vous en parleront bien évidemment mieux que moi. Donc cette distillerie quasi bicentenaire, ce qui est quand même assez rare, va pouvoir vous offrir le concept vraiment écossais, que ce soit dans le jus ou que ce soit dans le vieillissement.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for coming. My name's Stuart Walker. I'm the manager at Fettercairn Distillery, and I'm here with my colleague today, Ludo who's head of whisky experience at Whyte and Mackay. And we're going to give you a wee insight into the Scottish Oak project that we've got running at Whyte and Mackay at the moment. Ludo's going to go through some slides, and then we've also got some whiskies in front of you that we're going to do a tasting with later on. Can I ask that any questions that you do have, if you can put your hand up, and then someone will come with the mic for you to ask the question. Okay. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stuart. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all, especially old friends, after so many years. So as Stuart mentioned, we're going to be talking about Scottish Oak today, and this is what we'll be covering. So I'll give a brief introduction to Whyte and Mackay, because that way you'll understand the reasons why we decided to develop the Scottish Oak Initiative. Then I'll tell you about the initiative. What is it? We've got a little experiment for you, so we'll need your help actually with the samples on the table. I'll say a few words about oak in general that's used in the industry, before moving on to Scottish oak in particular. Then we'll look specifically at flavor, so what sort of flavors do we get from Scottish oak? And then I'll tell you a little bit about our plans for the future. So let's start with Whyte and Mackay. So Whyte and Mackay is a business that's been around for over 175 years, and it was started in Glasgow. And we focus on three things, really. The first one is we make whiskey for everyone. So what I mean by that is that in our portfolio, you'll find fairly young blended whiskies, which most people can afford. And you'll also find whiskies that are very rare, very old, for example, from the Dalmore, which very few people can afford. We also cover a flavor spectrum that appeals to most whiskey enthusiasts. We also believe in partnerships that make local whiskey global. So what we mean by that is, from a commercial point of view, first of all, as I'm sure you'll all appreciate, we want to share our whiskey all around the world. So we need to develop partnerships that work both for our partners in the market and also for us. And when it comes to whiskey production, it's the same sort of idea. We can't just make whiskey by ourselves. Nobody can make whiskey entirely by themselves. You need equipment. That equipment needs to come from somewhere. You need raw materials, so things like barley and yeast, that comes from producers. So it's important for us to develop partnerships that work for both parties. And that's important when we think about Scottish oak. And we like to develop flavors from acorn to glass. So as you know, every step of the whiskey making process can have an impact on flavor. So we look at every single step in order to develop flavors that we're looking for. We have 5 distilleries in Scotland, 4 single malt distilleries, 1 single grain distillery. Our bottling plant is in Grangemouth, and our whiskey makers are based in Glasgow. That's where the blending room is located. When it comes to oak and casks, this is where we get casks from at the moment. So many parts of the world, we use a lot of European oak, some Japanese oak for some specific additions, and obviously a lot of American oak as well, so casks that have been used in America to mature whiskey over there. Now, there's a clear gap here. I showed you a map of Scotland, I showed you our distilleries in Scotland, and clearly there's no dot there. So up until now, as we're developing the Scottish Oak Initiative, we had no access to Scottish oak. So what is the Scottish Oak Initiative? Well, it's an innovation in a new field in whiskey. And the idea here is to establish Scottish oak for the future, not just of Whyte and Mackay, but of the industry as well. So when we started talking to the different partners who we need to work with to develop a supply chain for Scottish oak, we were very clear from the outset that we weren't interested in exclusive contracts. What we're trying to do is make Scottish oak available for the whole industry in the same way that European oak and American oak is currently available to everyone. And of course, we want to explore new flavors. We're very interested in understanding the kind of specific flavors, hopefully new flavors, that we can extract from trees that grow in Scotland. So who's driving this initiative? Well, it's mostly this man, actually. This is Greg. Hopefully most of you have met Greg. Greg is our whiskey maker, and for the past 6 years, he has been driving this initiative with, of course, the full support of Stewart and the Whyte and Mackay family. And two other important partners in this initiative that it's important to recognize are the Speyside Cooperage. So they're based just outside Craigellachie in Speyside. And also the Association of Scottish Hardwood Sawmillers, who have been pivotal in getting us to where we are today and who will be very important in the future too. So at this point, I'm conscious you've got whiskey in front of you, and I don't want to keep you waiting. So there's 3 samples on flavor wheels. So during the course of this presentation, I would like you to taste these whiskies, please. Blind, we'll tell you what they are in a minute. But for now, please have a taste. And we'd like you to use the wheel to record what you think are the main flavors in the samples. A lot of what we're doing with the initiative is we're learning. It very much is a learning process. So we're trying to gather as much data as possible. So if you're happy to help us, please sort of score the whiskies along the 8 axes, which are here. Rank them from 0 to 5 in terms of intensity, with 5 being the most intense. And if you don't mind, we'll collect these afterwards and add this to our data bank of knowledge. Keep the fourth one. Keep the fourth one to the end, please. We'll talk about that one later as well. But you can start with the first 3. So, oak. So why hasn't Scottish oak been used historically? Well, first of all, you know this. In the very early days of whiskey production, whiskey wasn't matured. A lot of the whiskey actually was mixed with herbs and spices and consumed as a liqueur. Casks were used occasionally, but mostly for transport, as opposed to contributing flavor to the whiskey. Also, it's important to know that there really hasn't been Scottish oak available for whiskey production. For many years, Scottish oak in Scotland was reserved for the production of ships for the Royal Navy. And the other important factor is actually we've never needed them, because when we started to understand that maturing whiskey in oak casks contributed positively to flavors, then we already had access to great casks, particularly from Spain. So sherry was being shipped in European oak casks from Spain to the UK. The casks were emptied, so the sherry could be consumed, and the casks didn't go back to Spain. They were used to mature whiskey. And equally later on, the legislation changed in the US, which said that American whiskey, bourbon whiskey, had to be matured in brand new American oak casks, which meant that suddenly we had a huge supply of second-hand casks. So gradually, American oak started to replace European oak as the main type of oak used in the whiskey industry. And there was plenty of those casks, so we've never really had a need to look at Scottish oak. Why isn't it used today, though? Well, there's loads of challenges. For a start, Scotland doesn't have that many trees. Compared to other countries, if you've had the opportunity to drive through the Highlands, absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning, but you may also have noticed that there aren't that many trees there. The other thing is, when it comes to commercial forests, so forests that are planted with a commercial purpose, the foresters will grow pine trees. Pine trees grow relatively quickly, Stuart was saying that you remember that some of the forests that you saw being harvested 40 years ago are now ready for harvest again.
Being harvested again, yeah.
So you can turn around pine trees relatively quickly compared to Scottish oak that takes at least 100 years to go, if not 200 years. And pine, of course, is used in construction. It's used for furniture as well, whereas there hasn't really been demand for Scottish oak for whiskey production, again, because we've had access to other types of casks. Where there are forests with Scottish oak trees growing, often these forests are remote, very difficult to access, and it means that cutting the trees down is not easy. And there's also a question of what you do once you've cut the tree down. So the sawmills don't have equipment that can cope with oak trees in the same way that they have equipment that can cope with pine trees. Also, they don't have the skills. You would think cutting a tree into staves, to make casks is easy, but it's not. It plays a part in the flavors that we extract from the wood, but also if you don't do it properly, the casks can leak. There's a way of cutting trees. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Transporting the trees from the forest to the sawmill is tricky as well. You may have seen, if you've driven through Scotland, you may have got stuck behind a lorry like this. It happens a lot. Lorries carrying pine trees. Again, these were designed for pine trees as opposed to oak trees. Seasoning as well, so the wood needs to be dried before it can be used for whiskey maturation. Scotland doesn't have the best climate for seasoning compared to warmer places. And importantly too, we have many coopers in Scotland, but what they do is repair casks, because the casks we have, when they come to Scotland, they're already fully built. So they've been trained in repairing casks, but not building casks from scratch. So when you look at all this, it's not surprising that up until now, nobody has said, you know what, there's huge amounts of challenges here, but if we take them one by one, we should be able to develop a supply chain for the whiskey industry. So what exactly is Scottish oak? Now, you'll be familiar with these three species of oak. They're the three species that are mostly used in whiskey production. So you have Quercus petrea, Quercus robur, and Quercus alba. So different species. And they have different properties. This is where you need to keep me right, Stuart, because I do tend to get this one wrong. So Quercus petrea is the slowest growing type of species, which means that as it grows over the course of a year, it only grows by about 1 to 2 millimeters. So about that much that the tree trunk expands. Because it grows slowly, it has a lot of veins, but it doesn't have a lot of the hard part of it, which is called the... I will come back to that in a second. I can't remember the word for it, sorry. The hard part of it, which contributes to tannins in the whiskey. Quercus robur is sort of medium growth in terms of its rate. So it grows at about 4 to 5 millimeters per year. So a little bit more, a little bit faster. So it's sort of medium in terms of the hard wood that you get and the veins in the wood. Quercus alba tends to be faster growing. So that can grow to maybe about 5 to 6 millimeters per year. So again, it has more hardwood in it than veins. And all of this means that you have different chemical compounds inside the wood that will contribute different flavors to the wood. So the species is important. And in Scotland, we have different species that we can play with. So you recognize Quercus petrea, Quercus robur. There's actually what we've noticed is happening as well in Scotland is these two species have started breeding. So there's a third species that's appearing that's somewhere in between these two. And you also have other more quirky ones, I guess, that you may not have heard of, like home oak or turkey oak. When I walked here this morning, It's a good time of year, actually, when you walk around, because the leaves are beginning to fall down. So you can see if you can spot oak trees around here. And I did see leaves like this on the path just outside here. So there's obviously a Quercus petrea tree nearby. So what does it taste like? Well, there's, the answer is actually quite complex, because at the moment we're working with individual trees. We're very much micro-sourcing mostly felled trees, or trees that naturally fell because of wind and storms. So what we're trying to understand is whether we can generalize the sort of flavors that we get from the different species, but also from the different regions of Scotland, and also from the different heat treatment that we apply to the wood before the whiskey goes into the casks. And we know that there's loads of things that can impact flavor. So as we touched on, depending on the species, you will have different chemical compounds. So American oak, for example, has more vanillin and more whiskey lactone, and that contributes different flavors. European oak tends to have more eugenol, another compound, and more tannins. So again, it contributes different flavors to the whiskey. Also, the type of forest has an impact. So a lot of the forests in Scotland are wild forests, and we also have semi-managed forests. So what we mean by that are forests that are sort of semi-commercial, semi-managed to grow trees under specific conditions. As you can see on the picture, and if you have a garden at home, I'm sure you've noticed that when there isn't a lot of light, the trees or the plants tend to grow really, really quickly to try and get to the light. If it's more open and there's more access to light, there's less competition and the growth can be slower. So the growth rate will impact as well the taste of the whiskey. Sawmills and how we cut whiskey, I touched on that earlier. You'd think that it's quite straightforward to cut this into pieces to turn into casks, but you need to bear in mind the veins that run through the tree as it grows. If it's not cut in the proper way, it can lead to leakage because the whiskey can seep too deep inside the wood. And what you do with the wood as well. So how do we dry it? Is it air dried? Is it kiln dried? And of course the different toasting and charring levels. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment with Demtos, which is the company that owns the cooperage in Speyside, to try and understand the difference between how tight the grains are, so that's to do with the growth rate that I talked about earlier, the different species, the different toasting regimes, to understand what flavors we get from all this. Now, this is going to take a long time because, as I explained, right now we're working with pretty much individual trees. But over time, over decades, we're hoping to build enough knowledge so we can point the foresters in the right direction to grow the right type of trees for the specific flavors that we're trying to develop. So that leads me on to the 3 samples that are in front of you. So the 3 samples in front of you, Stuart will tell you more about those in a second, but they come from 3 forests in Scotland, specific trees in 3 different forests. So at that point, I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Ludo. So this is where we probably need your help as well. So you've got your 3 samples in front of you. So you take, if you've noticed sample 1, this is a Quercus petrea tree. It's got tight medium grain when it's been semi-managed, so the wood source was actually semi-managed up until World War I. In terms of the tasting and the nosing, you're going to get that a lovely sweet, like vanilla nose in it. It's very floral. And when you taste it, there's just that really hint of a mild spice, like a ginger spice. I don't know if you get that in your tongue when you taste it. Look, if you can just write down in your notes what you've got, and even if you want to put up your hand and say it, it's fine. This first sample was actually sourced in Killearn, which is in Stirlingshire. So it's quite I would say a wetter area of Scotland.
Yep.
So it's going to contribute, the climate will contribute as well to the source of the spirit. You would. Okay.
And so this is 18 years old.
Yeah, it's all 18
Yep.
years old. And
All
the
18.
whiskey's all 46% ABV.
Yes, we standardized the strength just to try and focus on the aromas here. So it's all 46%.
So if you remember at the first one's Quercus Petrea, the second one you're going to nose now is Quercus Roba. It's the grains, because of the growth rate, the grains are not as tight as the first one. It was grown beside a riverbank, and it was exposed to a good fertile land and a better climate. What you're going to get now is, when you nose it, you're probably going to get a more intense nose. So you're going to get a really, really bold spice coming through, almost peppery. You're going to get that dark fruits, if you like, coming through in this note. So if you have a wee nose of it just now, I'm hoping that you should find that in the second. The other thing we should add with this is that this one was actually dried, air-dried, and milled within 10 miles of the source of the wood itself. So it was actually air-dried in the area it come from.
Yeah, so this one is more familiar with the sort of flavors that we're used to with sherry casks.
Yeah. I think this is like, it's like the sweetness of a sherry cask, to be honest with you, Ludo, yeah.
Without the influence of the sherry.
This is really the heart and soul, like the body of what we're doing, I think.
Yeah.
So when you taste that, you get this, immediately you get this lovely sort of spicy note on the tip of your tongue. And then it's followed by that lovely sort of fruit notes behind it.
Yeah.
It's the intense sort of dark fruits that's coming through.
Yeah, I'm getting some cloves as well and some leather. So quite
From the
deep,
tannins.
quite deep notes.
Yeah, very, very deep notes. The third one we're going to take is actually, this is Quercus Petrea again. It comes from Rossshire, so the climate is predominantly a lot drier in Rossshire. So you're going to get similar notes to the first one, but it's going to be toned down. So you're still going to get that spiciness, you're going to get that vanilla coming through, but it will be a lot toned down compared to the first sample that you took.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a little bit flatter, this one.
Yeah.
That's probably a good way to describe it. When Stuart and I nosed these samples, we did notice that adding a drop of water did help as well, tease out the differences between the
I would
whiskies.
say if you add a sample of water,
Yeah.
it'll tease out, it'll really drag out the flavours that we're talking about, so don't be frightened to add just a wee drop of water now. You got water? You got water there, yeah?
So I find the last one is a lot more floral as well.
A lot more floral,
More honeyed.
but it doesn't have the same sort of spice as the first two have.
Yep. I'll add a bit of water.
The first one's quite fruity now.
So Charlie, just for your benefit, so these are 3 18-year-old Fettercairn whiskies finished in Scottish oak casks from 3 different parts of Scotland.
Okay. So as you go through it again with the water in it, all you've done now is you've teased all that lovely fruit and spicy notes out from within the liquid. Sort of intensifies it. I think especially with the second one, the Quercus Roba. Totally different nose now.
Yeah. I mean, clearly here, so the reason why we chose 2 similar species and 1 different one is, first of all, to show you, the impact of the different species, but also to say that, not all the forests in Scotland are the same. So some have a dominant type of oak trees. And so, it's important for us to try and understand, what sort of flavors we can expect from the different parts.
There's climate, there's soil structure,
Quick question. You use the same whiskey batch, same charring as well?
Yeah.
Same charge.
Yeah, so at this point, I'll touch on that in a moment, where we're doing other experiments to understand how the different charring levels can have an impact on the different species, the different locations, and so on. But for the benefit of today, we're very much looking at the forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everything else is the same.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the 18 as well?
I think,
great.
I think we should talk about that now. So the 3 whiskies that you've had in front of you are actually the components. So your 4th whiskey is the Fettercairn 18 years old. So the components that you've already had are the components that's within the Fettercairn 18-year-old. So it's all medium toasted.
Yeah.
Right. ABV is 46.
46 point something, 46.8, so slightly higher than the...
Originally matured in American white oak, first fill and refill, and then we finished it in Scottish oak casks.
Yeah, in these 3 types of
Scottish
trees that you've just tasted.
For a period of 18 months.
So we're really exciting to be introducing this one, actually, because we've been working on this Scottish Oak initiative, as you heard, for 6 years. And this is the first single malt that we're releasing that sort of benefits from the work we've done, over the past 6 years.
There is so many things that we could, so many different things you could talk about with Scottish oak, but it's a learning curve for us as well. So we're really just in the infancy of this. So we're really excited about where this is going to go.
And this is a limited edition, as you might have guessed. We don't have that many, we haven't had access to that many trees. We don't have that many casks. So yeah, as you can imagine, this is the first one. It's probably the most limited one that we'll release as well.
Yeah.
In the future, we hope to be able to develop the supply chain even further so that we have access to more casks. And on that note, so yeah, please remember, if you've got a chance, to score the mats so that we can take a look at that after you've left. And another point to emphasize is you've looked at the same whiskies matured in different types of casks from different forests. Now, the opportunity is really for experimentation or almost endless.
Yeah.
Because we also want to look at how grain whiskey interacts with Scottish oak, so we've started that process. Malt whiskey, there's obviously different types of malt whiskey. We've got different types in our portfolio, so we're also keen to understand how the different new makes interact with the different casks. And also peated whiskey will probably have a different interaction with Scottish oak.
I would like to add at that point as well that, at Fettercairn, we've got this project going, but what we've noticed is the impact that Scottish oak has on new make as well as mature spirit is really phenomenal. It really changes the liquid so quickly.
Very quickly, especially because they're new oak casks. So yeah, they've still got a lot of tannins and flavor to give to the whiskey. Good. So that's all we wanted to share with you today. Now we'd like to open up the floor to questions or comments. If you have any, just please remember to use the microphone so that the people online can hear you.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. You actually said that you're charring Scottish oak, like the bourbon cask industry does for American oak.
Yeah.
You char. You don't just toast.
No. So this one was for the 18. It's and the samples that you have, if I'm remembering right, it's a medium toast, 220 degrees.
As well, but this is toast.
Yeah, this is a toast. But we're also doing charring to try and understand how the different toasting levels are affecting the flavors, depending on the species, depending on the forest. So there's loads of sort of individual casks that have been treated in different ways. Other things we can look at as well is not just the toasting or the charring level, temperatures, duration, and so on, but also what do we put in the casks before? Because, typically the American oak and the European oak casks, they've contained sherry, port, bourbon whiskey, Tennessee whiskey. Here we're using brand new oak. But it will be interesting to see, because the objective of this is not just to benefit Scotch whiskey distillers, but Scotch spirit producers. So we're hoping that in the future, other producers in Scotland that produce other types of spirit will also have access to these casks so that their spirit can extract different flavors from the wood, contribute different flavors to the wood, and then we can mature whiskey in these casks to see, to try and develop new flavors, really. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say on top of that as well that we're maturing it in different warehouses. So like all warehouses, the cask itself is going to mature different in whatever warehouse it's allocated in. So there's so much ways we can go.
The scope is a little bit daunting, actually, if you think about it. But it's super exciting as well, and it's also something that will probably benefit future generations.
Yeah.
But it's still worthwhile doing, and there are benefits beyond flavour as well for the Scottish economy, for the environment. It's in a way, we can grow oak trees in Scotland. So why do we get trees, from America and Europe all the way to Scotland?
Yeah.
We should be able to use Scottish oak, and it should develop the economies in rural places as well. We might need more coopers, so there are so many benefits for the country.
Quick question and very basic. How many years to grow an oak, and how many casks from one oak?
Yeah, okay. So that varies depending on the growing conditions and the species. I think it's difficult to grow a tree in less than 80 years, I would say.
You're probably looking for full maturity, 150 to 200.
Yeah, 150 to 200. So especially European oak, we talked about Quercus petrea, Quercus robur. Quercus petrea in particular is very slow growing. So you saw some of the samples that we had. I think one was 230-year-old. So some very old trees there. Oh, how many casks? 2 or 3. I think that's another challenge as well with some of the trees that we're using. And one reason why Quercus alba is better, if the trees grows more quickly, you tend to have fewer branches. The more branches you have, the more knots you have. And if you have a knot, you can't use that part to turn the wood into a stave for coopering to create a cask. So if you have a tree that has grown in a wild forest with lots of different branches, then you can extract less wood than if you have a really tall, nice, straight tree with few branches.
I think it's worth adding at this point that most of the wood that we're sourcing is natural felled wood, and most of the wood, all the wood that we're really using is air dried, predominantly local to the area where it has fallen. So, but there's so much angles we can go with this.
Yep. Great. Yes, Charlie.
Sorry if this has probably been covered already. I was a very late arrival, so apologies. Has there been much historical effort or programs for growing Quercus alba in Scotland, or can that work?
I don't know if it can work. It's definitely not a common species in Scotland. The 4 main species that we've identified so far are petrea, robur, home, and turkey. So maybe we'll come across Quercus alba trees as well, but not so far.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone?
Okay.
No? Fantastic. Well, a big thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope
you very much.
enjoy the whiskies.
Thank you.
And please come to see us at the stand.